Hi, everyone, and welcome to If She Knew, a podcast where we talk about mental health, vulnerability, and all sorts of real life experiences that a lot of people go through, but we don't really talk about. As always, if you haven't already, go ahead and follow on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Tierney's Journey, which is at TIERNEYS Journey. Today, we are joined by Heather, who is a registered dietitian, and she's going to be sharing her experience with having an eating disorder and the recovery process, and just sharing some more information about eating disorders with us. So let's get into it. So to start, can you share what kind of content you create on social media and where people can find your content?
Yeah. So I share like nutrition content, eating disorder content, intuitive eating content, kind of all about how to have a healthy relationship with food. So there's a lot of different things that go into that, kind of like how to fight diet culture. So it's at Honest Health Heather on Instagram. I've like dabbled in blogs and such, but this is pretty much where I put all my content.
Okay. And I'll link her at below so you guys can find her as well. Can you share kind of about your story with an eating disorder? How did it start? Did anybody know about it? Were there any comments made about it? Kind of all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. So I think in like middle school, I feel like as a lot of folks feel like insecure, like your body's changing and all of that. And so that definitely was my case. And so I just was feeling uncomfortable, and I knew that like a lot of people would lose weight or like eat healthier or work out more and like feel better. And so I thought that was the solution. So it was like 2015, January, New Year's resolution. So it's like 10 years ago, which is crazy now, was to like lose weight and be healthier. And so I went in the intention of just being healthier, and it definitely spiraled into an eating disorder. And so I would just like generally like not eat enough or work out too much. And so I wasn't feeling my body enough that it needed. And so it kind of just like snowballed. I feel like for a lot of folks, they never go into it trying to have an eating disorder or like thinking that's going to happen. But sometimes it just is the case. And so, yeah, it kind of just got worse. I would eat less. I would work out more. And so there's a lot of body image stuff that went into it, like looking at myself in the mirror and feeling like I was way bigger than I actually was, and never really feeling like I was small enough. And so luckily, I was really blessed that my parents were paying attention and knew something was up. And so a few months in, like honestly, like 6 months, they noticed that I was losing weight and that I wasn't healthy anymore. And so was able to go to a doctor, and so was able to get treatment. And so went to an eating disorder treatment center. I saw a therapist, saw a dietitian. So it was able to be, treated immediately, which is a lot of times people don't notice, or like it's really hard to accept help. Mm-hmm. And luckily I was like only 15 at the time. So I was a little bit more open, I think, potentially than if I was older, in my own ways, because I was still living with my parents and such. So I was able to get help, and it wasn't an immediate thing. It took obviously years. Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest thing for me was the therapy piece of, I think a lot of people see eating disorders as a physical illness, which it is in a lot of cases, but it's so much more mental that it takes way longer to work through the thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so it was therapy that really worked through all of that stuff and kind of got me, recovered. And I would say I've been recovered for a lot of years now.
Good. So is it one of those things where you like yourself can tell that you're having unhealthy relationships with food, or in your head are you like, oh no, this is fine?
Yeah. A lot of times, like I there probably is instances otherwise, but most of the time that I've experienced with myself and with like clients, you don't really know. You feel like this is normal, and like you honestly have voices in your head that's telling you that this is right and this is appropriate. Like, I am overweight. I am unhealthy. I need to lose weight or not eat a certain way or whatever. And so it truly feels like what you're doing is normal. And so in the treatment process, what I've worked with clients is trying to challenge that voice and try to find the truth and try to find where the other voices of like what's actually going on, that it actually is an eating disorder and not healthy. But a lot of times the thoughts are so intrusive and feel so strong that it's hard to know what's true and what's not.
And then kind of going off of that, how does anxiety, depression, and like needing a sense of control kind of play into your experience with this?
Yeah, definitely plays a lot. Yeah, a lot of people that have eating disorders struggle with anxiety and depression. And so if you just think about like the desire to look a certain way or to control food, there's a lot of anxiety just naturally in it. And then also when you're like starving your body or just not taking care of it well, your brain's not getting the fuel it needs. And so that's what leads to like the depression. So I definitely felt both of those. And yeah, I don't think it's 100% all the time, but the control piece is also huge. And so it gives people a sense of, I can control my life by doing this food portion, even though other things in their life are out of control. So there's a huge interconnection of trauma, of abuse, of things like that people become having eating disorders because of all the things that it's so hard to control in their lives.
Yeah. What, if you don't mind sharing, like during your treatment, what kind of things did you do to try to help have a better mindset with food and exercise?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, a lot of it is challenging it. So there's like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is working through the thoughts. And so like I can give, for example, like the idea of like, I don't know, if I eat a slice of pizza, I'll gain 10 pounds. It's challenging that of like, that's literally impossible. Having a whole pizza will not cause you to gain weight. Like these kinds of things of actually going through each individual thought and challenging it. But it can get exhausting if you think about it, of how many thoughts you have during the day and having to challenge it all. But that's one of the biggest ways to work through it. And like similarly with exercise, like I spent months with zero exercise. I definitely became like addicted to it during my eating disorder. Of it was such a coping mechanism of how I handled everything. And if I didn't do it, I have so much anxiety. And so I had to cut that out to kind of rewire my brain to have a healthy relationship with it and how to view it as honoring to my body and kind rather than like pushing it down and like punishing it. And so it just takes a lot of thoughts essentially to challenge and kind of work through and figure out what's true. And it often takes like someone on the outside, either a dietitian or a therapist, to kind of help you figure out what's true, what's not.
Yeah, I think that's super important because a lot of people, like you said, don't realize that eating disorders are a huge part mental, like anxiety, depression, sense of control. So they don't understand why you can't just like stop it like that. And it's a huge part of like, I mean, I haven't struggled with an eating disorder, but I have anxiety. And I know just having anxiety, it's like you have that constant sense of worry. So I can imagine if you're constantly worried about the same things, it gets very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the different types of eating disorders that there are?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I think that there's ones that are like super mainstream people know about, like anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder. So those are all different, like based on kind of what symptoms. So like one is more like linked to restriction. One is like binging and purging. So like eating a lot of food in one sitting and then compensating for it. Either vomiting or like other exercise, other different ways. Binge eating disorder is kind of a high intake of food without the purging part. But then there's a lot of ones that aren't talked about. So one that's like more research now is called ARFID. So it's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. It's simply known as like a picky eating disorder where folks struggle with food intake that affects like their body weight essentially because of like sensory things, like the way it tastes, the texture. But it can be really serious if not treated. And a lot of times body image is not a part of that eating disorder. Then there's a whole category called OSFED, which is other specified food intake eating disorders. And so I think what a lot of people misconceptions of eating disorders is like it's just a physical eating disorder, like someone looks skinny so they're anorexic or something, when body size is not a determinant of what an eating disorder is. Or people can be in all different kinds of shapes and sizes with a variety of different eating disorders. And it's not always a fear of getting fat, for example, of that's the driving force. There's so many different things that go into it.
Yeah, RFID is something that I just recently learned about because I have been seeing there's like a couple of social media people that have been like sharing about that. And I was
Yeah.
like, I have never heard of that before seeing it on social media. So that's super interesting because I know that a lot of people would just say like, stop being a picky eater. But
Yeah.
the fact that it
So
goes like
different.
so deep into that is really interesting.
Yeah. No, exactly.
And then what signs should people look out for in people that they're concerned about, and how should they go about asking about the like how they're doing in a sensitive way where they're not going to be
Yeah.
offended?
Yeah, it's hard. It really is. And I think it depends on the person for like approaching it. Signs also can be very different. So there's things that a lot of eating disorders are so hidden. So it's the thoughts that you don't really know what someone's thinking, or there's like hidden behaviors of like, yeah, either purging or like overexercising or hiding food that you can't really see. And so it's kind of trying to rely on the things that you can see. A lot of things I've found is the way someone talks about food or talks about their body is a really good telltale sign. So if they're talking about like, oh, I've been trying to stop eating XYZ, or I'm trying to lose weight and I've been doing these different things that aren't healthy, it's something to kind of look into. Or if you notice someone's weight changing, and I think so people are quick to being like, oh, congratulations, you lost weight, without actually knowing like what was the thing behind it and was it done in a way that was honoring to your body, which a lot of times it's not. And so like in my example, my parents like noticed I lost weight and approached me, and I was not like, oh, thanks so much for letting me know that I have an eating disorder. Great. Now I'm going to get treatment. There's often a lot of resistance because it's so hard to kind of accept it. And so just being expecting and having like realistic expectations that if you do say something to someone, might not always be received well, but it comes out of love, and hopefully down the road they appreciate that you said something, because a lot of times eating disorders are caught by family members or friends who notice. And so kind of just having, open communication and just like being curious with someone if you notice their behaviors, asking about it and saying like, hey, I care for you and this is why I'm asking this. And genuinely being worried. I think sometimes, especially like in a parent-child situation, signing them up for treatment or some sort of seeking help, like it can be an appointment with a dietitian or appointment with a therapist just once, just to see. There's also like screening tools that if someone is willing to take could be a helpful thing of just, oh, I didn't realize this was not normal and this is actually a problem.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to know because I think a lot of people are scared to have conversations with people about it because they're scared that they're going to be like pushed away or offended and stuff like that. So it's good to know that, you know, it's still helpful even if there's like pushback in the beginning, to encourage people to get help if they need it.
Yeah.
And I also saw, so on a lot of people's recovery journeys that they document online, they talk a lot about safe foods. Can you talk about what a safe food is and like if that was part of your journey in recovery, as well as if that's like a healthy way to go about recovery?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so safe foods play a big role in recovery. So if you think about like all the foods that exist for folks with eating disorders, there's often a category of ones that are absolutely terrifying, cause a lot of anxiety, and other ones that feel safer. So it's not always like there's certain foods that are absolutely 100% all the time totally fine, but it's often like ones that they feel more comfortable with. And so oftentimes like starting off recovery, so for me, like I had certain foods that I felt didn't cause as much anxiety or I wasn't afraid of, and so I could have those foods more freely without having anxiety. And so relying on those foods is helpful and important to kind of make sure you're nourishing yourself at first. So the journey is starting off relying on those safe foods and then challenging the other foods in kind of chronological order of which ones feel like safer, and then to the most least safe and the most scary, which takes a while a lot of times. But yeah, relying on those safe foods can be really helpful just to make sure you're eating enough. It doesn't really matter what you're eating in the beginning. But just starting there.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really important to know that even from my understanding, like having a little bit of that food that's challenging is like a big step for people.
Yes.
So it's good to know that that is a good way to go about starting.
Yeah.
I know that we kind of talked a little bit about misconceptions, but can you talk about misconceptions that people have about some foods or some diets, like carbs are bad for you and all of that kind of stuff?
Totally. Yeah, this is my favorite topic to talk about on social media, just because there's so much of it out there and so many things that are so untrue. It's like laughable so many times. Like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And so just like in general, social media has so much diet culture and so many lies that are put out there. And I think the biggest lie is that diets work, that if I go on a diet, I'll be healthy and lose weight and be happy. And the truth is, the science shows that diets don't work. 95% of people that go on diets don't lose the weight and aren't healthier afterwards. And so a lot of times it comes back, and a lot of times it leads to eating disorders. And so a big part of that is just kind of challenging all the beliefs that are out there that diets work, that's the way of doing things. And yeah, like you said, like the idea that carbs are bad. Carbs are so important. It's one of the biggest macronutrients. It's where we get the most nutrients. And so when we cut it out, we're going to be much more tired. Our hormones, our metabolism are not going to work appropriately. And so any kind of food group restriction, we're going to like feel it. Our bodies are going to tell us that something's up. And also just like the misconception that there's like good and bad foods. Like a lot of people tie certain foods to like morality. Like if I eat salad, I'm good. If I eat burger, I'm bad. And that's so untrue. We learn that with this belief, with this like morality piece, there's a bow and arrow effect. So if we restrict the foods that we enjoy, we're going to overeat in other areas and feel this deprivation and lead to an even more unhealthy relationship with food. And just so there is just so much danger with like the untrue beliefs that do exist.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up. Especially, I wanted to ask you about this because this is something that I literally just found yesterday. Orthorexia, which is a type of eating disorder that I feel like not a lot of people know about. Can you talk about kind of what that is and why it's becoming so prevalent?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So it's this eating disorder that is based on fixating on healthy foods, for example. So yeah, exactly that, like cutting out the bad foods that the media or whoever portrays it as. And yeah, a definitely big reason why it is like popular, so prevalent, is it's so normalized. It's like it's acting like healthy eating. It's like pretending to be healthy eating when it's not, when it's unhealthy, when it's so restrictive. Like folks who have orthorexia struggle so much to have any other food other than something that they deem healthy, and that's restrictive and that's unhealthy. And so just with diet culture encouraging the idea of cutting out any food that is high in calories or XYZ, it's encouraging this orthorexia.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to ask about as well with cravings. From what I've heard is like if you're craving something, like it's kind of your body saying, oh, you're missing nutrients in like certain ways. So is it okay to like, oh, if you're craving something, go eat it? Like, what are your views on that?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, totally. I see in a lot of my clients and me personally, like if I, for lunch, like didn't have many carbs in my lunch, I'm going to crave sweets later. Like your body knows and seeks it out. And so sugar is the quickest way to get carbs and get energy. And so not ignoring that sugar craving, like there's a reason it's there. And so, yeah, there's definitely work to be done, or like it's more complex than like have a craving, eat it all the time necessarily. But the idea with intuitive eating, which is what works and what's the kind of practice that I work with clients, is allowing yourself unconditional permission to eat. And so that means that, yeah, listen to your body when it's telling you need something. Listen to your body when it's telling you you're hungry, when it's full, and being fully in tune with it. And so it can be kind of challenging for people to be like, oh, I'm craving this all the time. And like, am I eating too much because I'm always doing it? But it's just trusting your body that it's there for a reason. And a lot of times people who have really high amount of cravings aren't eating enough. That's the reason that they're having all these cravings. And so, yeah, your body's so smart that it's telling you what it needs.
Yeah, because I think that cravings get a negative rap in a lot of ways, where people view it as like, oh, I'm really craving whatever, but like I don't need that,
Right?
you know, and then they just like don't eat. But it's like your body's trying to tell you you need something, and because of the way that people view cravings, they think of it negatively, so they don't want to give in to the craving, which I think is like a huge part of what people think about. Like, I feel like most people have that thought.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So we know that eating disorders can be deadly.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about how eating disorders can affect the way your body functions and kind of what other conditions can develop from having an eating disorder?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's something that is not talked about, that kind of what I thought, like, I wanted to lose weight and I didn't think there'd be consequences, and there's so many consequences. And so eating disorders, yeah, to your point, can be really deadly. They are the number one mental illness with the highest mortality rate. And so it is serious. Like GI disorders, organ function, heart failure, like loss of period, fertility issues. There's so many things that that can happen from like undernourishment. Like your body needs food to function and just have basic organ function. And so when that's not met, it's easily having issues. Yeah, and like just other things like feeling cold all the time, or irritability, or anxiety, depression kind of happens from underfueling, which are things that I experienced. And also like bone health. Like people don't realize how important your bones are. Like people can develop osteoporosis in their teens from under eating. And so just the severity of that, yeah, and same with like missing your period from under eating. It can affect fertility later on. And so there's consequences that don't just like affect you right in the moment. It's like lifelong. And so it's something to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because a lot of people probably don't think about how eating can impact things like fertility. Like that's not like a direct correlation that I feel like a lot of people would make. And I feel like a lot of people that are going through this aren't thinking about the future. They're just thinking about the present. So those are some really important things to be aware of, and try to help prevent in the future. So I really like that you brought those up.
Yeah.
How should people go about in situations where a parent is the one that's making comments or encouraging eating habits that aren't healthy? How should you go about that kind of relationship?
Yeah, for some people, it's such a big part of their eating disorder is like their parents' influence. Like we know there's research that mothers who have insecurities about their bodies naturally pass it down to their children just because of the way they talk about their bodies. And even in the genes, we've learned that like there's a genetic code that kind of get passes down too with eating disorders. So there is a huge influence in that way. But if you're surrounded by someone who is talking negatively about food, like we learn so much from our parents about everything. And so that's something that we're also going to learn. So there is such a danger to talking negatively about food and having judgments about them as a parent. And it can be hard to try to know like how to talk about it or like how to say this is not helpful. Sometimes it's not always well received. So the best case scenario, you tell somebody like, this is not helpful. Like, this is actually not true. And they're like, oh, wow, this is really helpful. Thanks for telling me that. But that's not always the case. And so it's kind of like, how can we best support yourself in the moment? Sometimes if it's like a grandparent or if it's like an uncle or something that's saying something that's super unhelpful, if like your sibling or something knows you're struggling, having them like be there for you and saying, okay, that was crazy what they said, like so untrue and like not helpful, just so you know, like I also heard that and that we can sit in this together, that was not helpful. So having that kind of like support in that exact moment can be helpful, when confrontation might not always be well received.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting too, is that kids are living generally like full time with their parents until they're 18 if they go to college. And that's like very formative years where a lot of people are prone to developing eating disorders. So if you have a parent that you're constantly there making dinner for you or like buying the food in your house for you, it can be hard to figure out, oh, how am I going to eat what I want to eat when I have a parent that's being like, oh, kitchen's closed at this time, which I feel like is such a common phrase that people use. And I feel like it's something with like our parents and grandparents' generation as well that is more common to have those views about food. And there's more research coming about now about why that's unhealthy. So it can be really hard to challenge your parent, but like Heather said, find someone that's going to support you and back you up And if your parents not supporting you in that way, you can also go talk to a guidance counselor or another trusted adult about it. And they can try to help you in those ways if
Yeah.
you're not getting what you need.
Yeah, I was also going to say, like, if you are seeing a therapist or a dietitian, like family counseling is such a huge part too. So I've experienced that too, of like being able to bring a parent into the session and explaining like, let's try to work on the way we talk about food, or yeah, parents who put restrictions on that, or like say that snacks are bad. Having some education and having like a trusted adult, to your point, like an educated that can tell them. Sometimes it can be hard for parents to take advice from their kids, but if it's like a professional who's this is their full-time job, it might be better well received.
Yeah. And I think another population that I know eating disorders are really prevalent in is athletes. So, how common do you think that it is for athletes to develop eating disorders? And what are some ways that you can go about encouraging like a healthy relationship with not only food but exercise consumption?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, they find that like 84% of athletes engage in disordered eating, like college age athletes, disordered eating behaviors. And so it is really high. A lot of times it is correlated to like weight focused sports or like aesthetics, like gymnastics, swimming, diving, wrestling, lightweight rowing. There's certain sports specifically, but all athletes absolutely can, especially when they feel like their appearance or their size is going to play a role in their sport. And they don't often have the right education of how to do it properly. And so how to fuel their body well, because of diet culture, because of messages telling them that weight loss is ideal and that eating certain foods is important. Yeah, to be smaller or something, for example. A big role that plays in like athletes' life is their coaches. And so it's hard because sometimes you can't control that, but in an ideal situation, coaches would have the ability to pour into their athletes in a healthy way and encourage them to fuel themselves well. I found with like my own clients that a lot of parts of their eating disorder stories is from their coaches, of just unhelpful advice around exercise. Yeah, like working out all the time, regardless of how they're feeling, of if they're sick, of if they're injured. Like our bodies tell us different things, and so pushing past that is so unhelpful. Yeah, there's sports dietitians that work specifically with athletes to make sure they're fueling enough. There's such a correlation between performance and fueling your body, and so you're going to pay a price if you're not fueling properly. And it is sad because there is such a prevalence of eating disorders because of this whole phenomenon.
Yeah, and just when you were saying that, it made me think of you brought up wrestling, and I know some wrestlers personally that would go like days without eating anything because they're trying to drop weight category or something like that. So there's just a very negative view of that where I'm like, there's probably healthier ways to go about.
Exactly.
But I feel like that's like a huge hurdle that has yet to be overcome in the sports field, especially.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like when you have, like if your sport requires you to be a certain weight class, like, yeah, in an ideal world that wouldn't matter, but I understand why it has to. There's ways to do it that are not spitting and like not, like going days without eating, like ways that are really harmful to your body. There's ways to do it that is gentler. And so, yeah, that's why working with a sports dietitian is usually helpful. But it's, yeah, in our culture, it's not really a lot of time not funded or not part of the equation, which can make it more dangerous for athletes.
Yeah, and hopefully in the future that changes soon and we get more dietitians in the sports field that are really protecting athletes and coaches that are really focusing on that.
Yeah.
So kind of going into that, did you always know you wanted to be a dietitian, or is this something that you decided to do after your experience?
Yeah, truly just because of my eating disorder. So yeah, I probably wanted to be like a teacher when I was little. I went through my eating disorder and I was like, there is nothing I want to talk about more than this, than diet culture, than eating enough, than like, yeah, my own experience. I just knew that there was so much out there that was so not helpful going through my eating disorder and things that caused me to have my eating disorder. Like it's often a perfect storm for folks. And so I was like, I really want to be able to help people the way that I was helped, kind of work through this. And so, yeah, completely came out of that. And so I don't take that for granted. I feel like God absolutely gave me my experience for a reason. And so, there is so much power when you have a shared experience with your clients. It doesn't always come up. Not all of them always know that, but it can be so helpful. It's like, I do know to an extent of how you're feeling. And so, yeah, I think it makes it a little bit more close to home too when I'm working with clients. I care deeply because I'm like, I know how it feels. I know how horrible it is. And so just giving me a little more passion for the work.
Something that I also just thought about, because you mentioned that New Year's resolutions is like a big part of your story.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is like negative goals and stuff to have for like
Yeah.
New Year's resolutions, and how can people go about like, oh, if you want to get healthy, what are like healthy ways to, you know, get in shape but not
Yeah.
become addicted to exercise and stuff like that?
Totally. It's so hard, right? Like, again, like I went into it not wanting an eating disorder. It just happened. And so I think a lot of it is trying to figure out the best way to do it. Like you said, yeah, like even just simple practices of like listening to your body when you exercise, for example. Like, yes, it takes motivation. It takes determination. Sometimes when you don't want to, it's not always like every single day I want to work out all the time, but it's taking rest days, like not working out 7 days a week and not working out till we're fatigued every single time. Being gentle with it. And a lot of times, like, it really does take working with a professional to kind of figure out that balance. Or if you're like suspecting like, okay, I am feeling like I can't take days off. It really becomes a mental thing of like, can we take days off if we're busy? Do we like skip social events because we need to work out? Like, that's the whole working out piece of to have a healthy relationship with it of, yes, it's important and it's good for our bodies and it's not everything. There's other things in our life that take the priority. And then similarly with food of, do I feel like my thoughts around food, are they like ruminating and do I feel them all the time? Like a lot of times people who obsessively like calorie count or measure their food, a lot of times it's not helpful. I can see for sometimes like temporarily just to be intuitive, like, oh, I wonder how much protein I'm eating, for example. There is a role to it, but I would be very cautious to start doing that in a way to start eating more healthy, for example. I also like to encourage adding. So if like New Year's resolution is to eat healthier, for example, see how many like fruit and vegetable servings can we have? Like start adding more protein, adding more fiber rather than taking out and saying, let's cut out sugar, let's cut out carbs, for example. There's ways to do it that kind of have a better mindset in your mind that won't lead to as easily to an eating disorder.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because I feel like a lot of people don't think about adding things to their diet to help them. But it is really important to be proactive and be very good at listening to yourself and having conversations with yourself about the behaviors that you have and the thoughts that you're having, so that you're aware of them and aware of if you're starting to get to a negative spot and you need help.
Yeah.
Having that self-awareness is really important. So what made you decide to start sharing your experience then on social media?
Yeah. I mean, it was 2 years like into my diagnosis essentially that I was like, I want to open up about this. It was inspired because I like benefited so much from people sharing their stories. So I had friends, like some people a little bit older than me, that told me that they had eating disorders, and it was so helpful for me to know that there's people out there that recovered. Mm-hmm. I truly was in my deepest part of my eating disorder and thought it is impossible for me to be out of this. I can't imagine a single day where I don't feel this way, that I'm not obsessed with food. And like, praise God, that was years later, I was able to completely get out of it. And so sometimes it's truly hearing from other people, okay, it is possible. And knowing you're not alone. Eating disorders can be so stigmatized and so much shame. Like, I think I'm so glad that anxiety and depression, I feel like, have gotten a better, like, talked about better and talked about more, that it's not as much shame tied to it. It's more normalized. I feel like eating disorders still have some way to go of there is a lot of shame, or even the idea that like having eating disorder is so materialistic, or you're so image focused because you care so much about your body. Like, it's not that, it's a mental illness. There's way more to it. And so just kind of, yeah, just the power of being able to tell your story to make people feel like they're not alone. So yeah, I was instantly like, I really feel like it's important to be able to talk about it. And I also learned so much through it. I was in therapy for years and years. And so I had a lot of knowledge that I felt like sometimes it's helpful. to talk about these kinds of things to people who don't know. And there's so much lies, like we talked about on social media about diet culture, and things aren't true. And so I wanted to put some truth out there on social media about our bodies, about food, about exercise, which is why I called it Honest Health, Heather, because I'm like, we need more honest things about health on social media that are actually true and evidence-based. Like I try to include a lot of things that are from research studies, because that's so important, because a lot of people, like wellness influencers or people who post, it's from nowhere, it's just made up. And so how can we have like true information that's put out there?
Yeah, I love that you share that. And it's not easy. Like, it's very vulnerable to share your experience.
Right.
But it's so important, especially when these are things that people don't talk about. Like, so many people experience eating disorders and don't talk about it. So they feel like it's alone. It's like similar with anxiety, depression. Like, if you're not talking to anybody about it, you feel like you are the only one going through it. So I really appreciate that you made the effort to like share on social media and be, a registered dietitian that's sharing like, these are the facts of like what is actually true, what's not true. Because I think that's really important, because a lot of the things that I've seen like you say about like myths on your account are like things that I hear every day from people and people still believe.
It's crazy.
So I think it's really important that you do that.
Yeah. And also like, I feel like there's so much there too that like people think that like it's so important to have these beliefs or something like that, like that I need to have these beliefs in order to be okay. Like it's hard to drop them, right? Like it's so ingrained in who we are. Like, oh, I need to follow low carb or else. And so when you have an alternative, it's easy to grab onto of like, oh, this is not true, and kind of knowing that. And then also with like eating disorders, I think, like you said, there's a lot of people that struggle with it more than is talked about. But I think also people are afraid of like, well, I don't have a full blown eating disorder, or it's not like diagnosed, or like I'm not like X weight, or I don't eat X amount of calories, that kind of thing. But I think you'd be surprised how many people walk around struggling with body dysmorphia or body image issues, or worrying about their food, or having compulsive exercise. Like it can come in so many different ways, and you don't have to be like sick enough in order to get help. I see a lot of folks who just are on their journey to have a healthy relationship with food. Like they don't have a diagnosable eating disorder per se, but like, how can I honor my body well? How can I fuel it well without putting it down? And while like we're in it for the long haul, for like long-term health, not like a quick diet fix. And so it can be hard to like make that step, but it's important just to like be self-aware for that.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because that is a huge thing of people being like, well, I don't have that necessarily, so I'm fine. But that is really important. And then what are some good resources that people can use to learn more about how to have a healthy relationship with food and about eating disorders?
Yeah. There's it's NEDA, so it's the National Eating Disorder Association. They have a website, they have a screening tool. I always recommend that to folks. Screening tool is really helpful just to bring awareness if you suspect even in the slightest that you or your friend or someone you know might be struggling. It's a good like first step. They also have a lot of resources about facts, about different ways to get treatment or help. And then even more attainable. Like I try to post a lot of things that are helpful, that are like good information. And I follow a lot of people, a lot of dietitians that are also in that realm. So you can kind of look at who I'm following, or look for someone who has like an anti-diet in their bio, anti-diet dietitian, anti-diet therapist, eating disorder therapist. I would stay away from wellness influencers, right? Someone with an accredited background of some sort of professional degree usually is helpful. There's so much out there that is so great that it's like up and coming, that there's more truth out there, but you also have to search for it. It's not the majority is not these anti-diet dietitians or eating disorder therapists. So, kind of having to like censor through it or sort through what's actually true and what's good, helpful information.
Yeah, so do your research. So I always like to ask people, if you could go back and talk to young Heather, what would you want to tell her?
Yeah, I've like cried about this before, of like, it is so crazy when you look back and you're like, wow, it's so sad to think of what I went through, and also realizing like there's such a bigger picture, that it wasn't all for nothing. I think I believe so much. I would say that like weight loss will not make you happy. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with your body. it was crazy to me that I thought that my 13-year-old body was like wrong. It was just changing.
Yeah.
And that like weight loss or like trying to get healthy didn't have consequences. Like I wish I could tell my younger self of like, if you go down this path, there's a lot of consequences, and just like explaining what would happen. Like I lost all my friends for like 6 months. Like I was completely cut off because I was so engrossed in my eating disorder. I struggled a lot with my relationship with my family. Just that was my whole life. And so kind of just telling myself of like, yeah, there's a lot of things that might happen because of this. It's not all as easy or as great as it might seem. And then just like gentleness. I think I really love working with adolescents and young population for that reason of they can be so hard on themselves and compare themselves to 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds when they're still just kids. And so like encouraging myself to enjoy being young and not worrying about what I look like, even though it feels hard.
Yeah, that's really great. And I love that you are able to reflect in that way now, especially because a big thing I know with like my therapy experience has been like looking at pictures of you when you're younger and being like, would you say those things that you're thinking about yourself to that person? And no, you wouldn't. But like it's hard to get through that thought process of being like, okay, if I wouldn't say them to like young me, why would I say that to me now?
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to be aware of. But I think that's all of the questions I have for you for this podcast, unless you have anything else you want to add.
I don't think so. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. This is really helpful, and I feel like it's going to be relatable for a lot of people who are struggling, and to know that they're not alone, which is the whole point of this podcast. So if you haven't already, go ahead and rate the episode 5 stars. You can do that by going to the profile page, hitting the 3 little dots, and then rate show 5 stars. And we will see you next week. Bye.